How does he look?
Looks great.
Really? Okay.
Ready?
Ready.
Won't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is HaochenZhang. I'm from China. I was born in Shanghai and came to the States when I was 15. And I'm currently 26 years old, and I'm a pianist.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, what does receiving the Avery Fisher Career Grant mean to you?
Well, I think the Avery Fisher Career Grant is really such an honor for me, and because I've been in the States since I was 15, and knowing all the great artists, some of them Curtis faculties where I was studying, and I know they were all Avery Fisher Career Grant recipients, and they've always been inspirations to me when I was studying at Curtis. So receiving such an honor really meant something so encouraging and so meaningful to me, I think.
Who specifically are you talking about who were past career grant winners? Do you?
Well, a lot of the cello faculty teacher Peter Wiley, and violin faculty teacher Ida Kavafian, and also pianist Mr. Jonathan Bez, and and so it's really been an honor for me to receive such an prestigious award.
Great. Why do you think it's become such an important award?
Well, I think the Avery Fisher Career Grant has become important because mainly of all the great artists that after receiving this award had gone to launch huge international careers, and that really built up the prestige for the award. Yeah.
What do you plan on doing with the monetary gift?
Well, I'm planning to spend the monetary gift hopefully buying a piano for myself, because I'm still staying in Philadelphia, where I was studying the Curtis Institute. Though I graduated, they were being very generous to me, so I used all their facilities. I could still come in as an alumni and practice on their pianos, but I also really wish to have a piano on my own, so that's, I think, what I'm going to do. Yeah.
What pianos are you looking at?
Oh, Steinway. I'm a Steinway artist, so yeah. And just recently becoming a Steinway artist, and I actually bought a piano, a Hamburg Steinway, in my home in Shanghai. So whenever I was there, I would just enjoy my time there. But I always wanted to also have a New York Steinway in my home in the States. So
now, this won't necessarily be on, but I just love this because in the old days, Steinway would deliver a Steinway to wherever you were going to perform. Is that still now that you're a Steinway artist?
Yeah.
Do they always deliver a Steinway to your choosing of wherever you're performing?
Well, that is the case only if the venue I was going to perform has no Steinways.
Right.
So, but because I'm sure it's a different time now, that Steinway is almost owned by every single concert hall, regardless of where. So it's very seldom that I need to call Steinway and ask for a piano. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they should just put one in your apartment in Philadelphia.
Well,
anyway.
Actually, it's required that to become a Steinway artist, you have to purchase a Steinway, and that's sort of the prestige of the Steinway artists, that they don't the company doesn't do discounts.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
even the most famous pianists, they have to purchase a piano.
I remember years ago, Bernstein was a Baldwin artist, and they had two paired Bechsteins, which Baldwin owned. And the Bechstein was a much better piano than
Baldwin. Yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your music education, first in China, and then you came to Curtis, I believe. And what like for instance are the differences or the similarities in the techniques and the teaching in that you've had throughout your life?
Well, yeah, I was very fortunate to have studied actually both in China under a very prestigious pedagogue, and afterwards with Mr. Gary Grafman at the Curtis Institute after I was since I was 15. And because they were really different kind of teaching ethos behind their with the education that I received. When I was studying China, I was under a much more systematic and disciplined sort of approach to music, that I would, spend time sort of searching for the sound quality of each note and just being really strict with everything, that what is right, what is wrong. And but when I came to the States, Mr. Grafman it was a totally different approach. He meant to just let us think about music ourselves and make our own decisions. And he was just giving sort of advices, but not actually kind of imposing any systematic way of teaching on us. And it was more important that we discover our own individuality and musical independence through our own sort of discovery. And so it's vastly different, but I'm really fortunate to say that I've received both kind of different approaches. That I think it was Isaac Stern that once said that there is no real freedom if you don't have real discipline in the first place. So I feel that that is a really good combination that I needed, and I think that every pianist should need.
Tell me a little bit. You've done a lot of concertizing, both in China and in Europe too, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the concertizing that you've done, and what this year is like for you also, and how you're spending your time making music.
Well, it's always been such an constantly enriching experience performing in different places, because you've seen things that you've never seen before, and you learn about cultures and different audiences and different aesthetics on music. In Japan, for instance, in Europe and in the States, you can feel from the reactions of the audience that and you just learn more about different places, and I think that really sort of broadened my vision, and I feel that is probably one of the most valuable treasure that a touring artist can have. Well, for this year, I have my new album CD out by BIS, BIS, the prestigious Norwegian label, and so I'm going to have a lot of recital tours, also in the States, but also in Japan and China, sort of performing programs related to the CD album. So that is sort of the most important thing for this season. And I'm also going to play with orchestras, including the Philadelphia Orchestra, in late April. And so, yeah, it's been an exciting year.
What are you going to be doing with Philadelphia?
I'm actually going to play both Rachmaninoff First and the Fourth Piano Concerto, the two seldom played piano concerti. Yeah.
Are they doing all the piano concerti?
Yeah, they're doing sort of a Rachmaninoff festival, and they asked me if I would be interested in these two piano concerto, and I thought, well, I've never played them, so it's a really interesting experience to learn them.
Who's conducting?
It's the actually I just sorry
Oh, that's okay.
yeah. It was, anyway, the guest conductor, but it's a French name. It's very complicated, so I don't want to pronounce it wrong.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it was the principal guest conductor. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us a little. Well, you won the gold medal of the Van Cliburn competition. What's that done for your career?
Well, I think the Van Cliburn competition, first and foremost, helped me launch my career as a concertizing soloist. And that's basically the most important aspect that the competition, that I benefited from the competition, is being able to have this career. But also during the competition, I think I learned a lot from different amazing pianists. The Van Cliburn competition was known for its difficulties. I think has the most amount of repertoire required for the competition. It's about, I think I played almost 5 hours of repertoire. But it's also sort of challenging because they have all kinds of different ways to make competitors suffer. And I feel that, for instance, during the final round, we have to play 2 concerti and 1 recital. And this is all happening in like 2 days for 6 finalists. And so we would have, instead of normally like having a orchestra rehearsal first and orchestra performance, and maybe next day doing a recital, they put you in orchestra rehearsal and then right afterwards playing a recital. And the next day doing the orchestra performance. So they sort of messed up the order on purpose. I think it's on purpose. So to sort of, I guess, train the soloist's ability to cope with, such high pressure situations. I think that that's really the aim of the competition, is not to just provide or produce a winner, but it's more like to produce a true able concertizing soloist, and that's been their goal. And so throughout the competition, I think I've learned that how one should cope with different situations, and that really helped me sort of afterwards when I had my real career as a soloist.
Wow, that must have messed with your head.
Yeah.
I mean, to have the rehearsal for the concerto and then to have to completely change and do your performance in the recital, and then go back to it must have been.
Yeah.
Oh, that must have been maddening.
Yeah.
So I know that you've been a soloist with orchestras both here in the U.S. and around the world. Which do you consider to be your most challenging up to this point that you've done, or the ones that have really made a big impression?
Well, I was fortunate enough to play with many prestigious orchestras and conductors, but I think if I have to pick the one that stick out in my mind the most is the time when I toured with the Munich Philharmonic under the late Lorin Maazel. And it was really a very incredible experience. I think we toured China, and it was Beethoven Fourth, a repertoire that they were so good at, and they had the utmost Germanic sound for that, which is essential for that piece. But the authenticity of the style of the orchestra really impressed me, and working with Maestro Maazel is such an inspiration. And he memorized everything, and even for the concerto, and it just seems so effortless the way he produced music. And so I think that is sort of so far my biggest inspiration playing with orchestras.
Great. So tell us a little bit about what you are playing tonight and why you chose it.
Well, I'll be playing the Janacek Sonata tonight, and it's not a very often performed piece, but I think it tells a lot about who I am as an artist. it's actually also one of the pieces on my new album CD. So, but it has this kind of psychological introspectiveness and reflectiveness, which I thought is something unique in among the solo repertoire, especially played by often by young pianists. I think it was more of an outpouring, kind of romanticism or virtuosity. So I feel like me playing this piece would somehow make a little bit more distinctive statement, because I've always been somewhat an introvert, and I feel that it's a piece that's really close to me, and I want to share that experience with the audience.
It comes with a history, why Janacek wrote it. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it's a tragic gun shooting event that happened in his motherland, and he was really sort of depressed about it. But it was really created a psychological turmoil that, and you can tell clearly from the piece. I mean, he wasn't sort of depicting the theatrical drama of the tragedy, but it was more of a psychological, a very inner kind of depiction of his reaction about this tragedy. So I thought it was a really, really fascinating piece.
So,
can I just have you say the composer's name?
Janacek?
In your description of the piece. Like
Okay.
Janacek wrote this stuff.
Okay. Did I? Which part? The last question, right?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, just this last question.
Okay.
or just, I'll even make it. So tell us what you're going to play tonight.
Okay. I was going to play the Janacek Sonata tonight, and I feel that it is a very distinctive piece. It was inspired by a tragic event that happened in his homeland, and he was very depressed by it, and so he wrote a piece describing this event, but not in a way that it's sort of describing theatrically the drama of the tragedy, but rather his inner psychological reaction towards this tragedy, and his psychological turmoil of death. How does he view death, and how does he view patriotism in his own mind that is inspired by this tragedy? So I thought it was a very distinctive and fascinating piece, and has this kind of unique inner reflectiveness that I thought was something that I was really drawn by, and so I wanted to share that experience with the audience.
So let's talk about each of it's in two movements.
Yeah.
The first movement is foreboding,
Yeah.
and second movement is called death. Can you walk us through a little bit of the first movement, and tell us what it's the first movement, what it's called, and give us a little sense of the structure or how the first movement is laid out, if you would.
Well, it was more of actually a very psychological depiction of, because it's really just foreboding. So it's actually not describing any sort of real concrete event, but just a ominous sense of whatever tragedy that's going to come up. So it is very dark, and but in a sort of more vague and ambiguous way, and that has created some kind of a mystical atmosphere. And it's a fascinating piece to start, and I think it would immediately draw the audience attention into something that sort of an otherworldly environment, and that's how the piece is laid out. And then later on, of course, there is more of an outpouring drama accumulating from that kind of mystery that has been built up from the beginning. Yeah.
And then the second movement, which is known as death, that's very repetitious, is it not?
Well, the rhythm and the...
I mean, I'm sorry, I shouldn't ask it. Would you describe the second movement?
Well, the second movement of the Janacek Sonata starts with a kind of a very still rhythmic pulse, and it's very, very slow, very, very quiet, and in this almost kind of utterly still kind of pace that there unfolds his thoughts about death, and it goes on about a minute or two without any sort of obvious change in the narrative. And then it starts accumulating a bit more and more and more, and then suddenly all the deep drama break out and sort of accumulated to this kind of tragic climax. And then comes the repetition, the recap of the theme, but this time not, instead of being quiet, it's utterly bold and violent almost, and then sort of making the utmost tragic claim about his feeling about the tragedy, the anger, and the utter despair. And then it sort of goes back to the beginning mood, that it's fading away. And then very, 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 very gradually, the piece ends in and returns back to absolute quietness again. So it's sort of like a psychological journey that begins with very still, almost meditative quality, and then unfolds into a very dramatic climax, and then coming back and sort of bringing everything to a resolution in the end. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Does anyone have another question?
What made you pick piano as your instrument?
Oh.
But you have to look at me.
Yeah. Well, I picked the piano actually out of something that is totally non-music related. I was introduced to piano by my parents actually in the beginning, and I've always I was born in a sort of classical music background, because none of my family members are musicians, but they are sort of classical music lovers. So since I was in my mom's womb, we play Mozart's light symphonies or light Haydn symphonies. Nothing Beethoven though, but just Mozart and Haydn. But so I grew up sort of having that background, but none of my parents ever thought about, sort of introducing the kid to learn an instrument as a hobby or anything like that. Until one day my mom was reading the English magazine, actually the American magazine, Reader's Digest, because she was studying English at the time. And then one article caught her attention. It was something like how piano was, the best way to raise baby intelligence. And that really, it talked about all kinds of sort of technical things what piano can do to develop a kid's brain, and the multi voices, and the sort of equal training for both hands, and all that, and it was fascinating to her. And I think back in the day in China, we're all generations of the one-child policy, and I think IQ is something very important. It's something sort of like the future of the family. So because of that, and also, of course, with the fact that my family has always been lovers of classical music, so they decided, why not let the kid sort of try an instrument and see if he's interested in it or not. So that's how I started.
When you came to Philadelphia, did you come all by yourself? Because you were fairly young when you came to Philadelphia, right?
Yeah. Well, I came to the States when I was 15. So my mom was with me for one semester. Then she had to go home. Go back to China because her visa expired. So so then I'm by myself ever since. Yeah, yeah. And back in the day, Curtis didn't have dorm, so we just lived by ourselves in private apartments. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's hard for when you're 15 years old.
Yeah, I think it was a learning experience. I've never lived prior to coming to the States. I've never lived by myself without a family member ever. So it's the first time I have to learn to do a lot of things I've never thought I would learn, and yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, you're a kid, 5, 10, learning the piano. When along that path did you discover that you were an artist and you defined yourself as an artist? Tell Johnny.
Yeah. Well, I think my love for piano was a very gradual process. I know I've often heard stories like, oh, when I first heard the piano when I was 5 or 6, I immediately fell in love with it. Well, that was not like that for me, and I feel that I clearly felt something so accessible to the piano when I first learned, just even touch my key on it, my hands on it. But it was just the feeling of a certain affinity. But I couldn't say that I was consciously, loving music. I think the understanding and the love has to come in proportion. I think the more you understand about the depth and beauty of music, the more you will start loving it more. So it's a very, very gradual process. I guess the time when I really thought I want to become an artist was when I came to the States, when I heard different people of all kinds of different backgrounds. So it's not like when I was in China, when I'm surrounded by people that received a very similar music education. When I was at Curtis, it was all different kinds of people, all amazing musicians, but playing with totally different approaches to piano. I think that really inspired me to sort of being reflective on who I am and what should I look for in my music, and that kind of self-awareness or self-searching, I think, really began after when I was 15. And then, of course, I think unavoidably would come the notion of an artist. I'm an artist. What should I do? What should I bring to the arts? Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much you want to talk about the piece, but Janacek was moved because a young Czech boy was killed by who had was protesting to go to the university in his own language, in Czech language, at a time when universities in the Czech Republic were only open in the Austrian Empire to Germans. And so he was murdered on the steps
of the university doors. Yeah.
Could you tell? Are you comfortable telling us just a little bit specifically about that? And was murdered by Austrian troops.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is what caused
Janacek. Yeah. Of course.
Okay.
So I would just tell that, right?
As simply as possible.
Okay. The Janacek Sonata was inspired by a tragic event that happened. Can I was just thinking about it's before or after World War One.
It's before.
Before World War I, right?
Yeah, it's before. It's during the Austria-Hungarian Empire.
Yeah.
It's 1905.
1905. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. What I was thinking.
1/10.
Yeah, it's October 1905.
October 1st, 1905. Right.
Yep. So the Janacek Sonata, actually, it has a title called October 1st, 1905, because of a tragedy that happened on that very date, that a young Czech student, Janacek is also a Czech, and that a young Czech student protesting in front of the university, which were only open for students to study in German. And at that time, Czech was still under the Hungarian-Austrian Empire. Sorry. The Austrian-Hungarian Empire, right? So can I do that again?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, okay. So the Janacek Sonata, it actually has a title. It's called October 1st, 1905, because of a tragedy that happened on that very date that inspired Janacek to write this piece. A young Czech student was protesting in front of the university, and actually Czech was still under the Austrian-Hungarian Empire at the time, and students were only allowed to go to universities to study German, but not Czech. So he was protesting against it, but was shot dead by an Austrian troop soldier. So that is created a huge outburst within the Czech society, and that's what inspired Janacek to write this tragic piece. Would that be fine?
That was lovely.
Okay.
Good?
I'm good, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
look forward to tonight.
Thank you.
It's such a powerful
Are you
piece.
wired?
Oh, sorry.
You're still attached to the chair.
Stay
Okay.
where you are.